The frontier town was buzzing that afternoon. Dust rose in the marketplace as people gathered near the wooden platform. At the center of it stood a young native man, his wrists tied, his face bruised, and his dignity stripped away. To the crowd, he wasn't a person. He was a spectacle, a prize to be mocked. They hurled insults, savage, animal, as if the words would cut deeper than the ropes already digging into his skin. Some men laughed, some jeered, and a few prepared to bid for him, as if he were nothing more than property. This was not unusual in that harsh time. Frontier towns often dealt cruelly with anyone who looked different, who didn't belong. But among the crowd, one woman stood quietly. She was a widow, known for her resilience, raising her children alone. After her husband had been taken by fever, life had already been unkind to her, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her eyes did not hold hatred or mockery. They held something else, something the man had not seen in a very long time, compassion. The sheriff raised his hand, calling for silence. "Now then," he barked, "this savage will be sold to whoever makes the highest offer. He's strong, good, for labor. But don't forget, he's dangerous. Keep your guns close if you plan to take him." The man clenched his jaw, refusing to bow his head. He had been beaten, humiliated, and called every name imaginable, but he would not let them see fear. Still, inside, he wondered if this was the end of whatever freedom he had left. Bids began to fly. Coins tossed, voices shouting numbers. But then, cutting through the noise, came a voice no one expected. "Don't hurt him." The crowd froze, every head turned. It was the widow. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew steadier as she stepped forward. "I'll buy him." A hush fell over the market. Then came laughter, sharp, mocking laughter. "You," a man sneered. "A widow with 2 children to feed? What would you want with a savage?" Another chimed in. "He'll slit your throat the first chance he gets." The woman didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on the man standing tied and beaten before her. She saw not a savage, not a criminal, but a human being whose spirit had been battered yet unbroken. "You can call him whatever you want," she said firmly, "but I see a man worth saving." For a moment, even the sheriff was silent. The crowd murmured, shocked at her audacity. The man himself looked at her in disbelief, unsure whether to trust the kindness in her words. But in that instant, amidst the dust, the noise, and the cruelty, one choice had been made. A choice that would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come with swords or sermons. Sometimes it comes in the quiet courage of someone willing to see the humanity the world refuses to see. The marketplace erupted in disbelief. A widow, bidding on a man everyone else called a savage. It sounded like madness. "She's lost her senses," one woman hissed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Another man laughed harshly. "What's next? She gonna marry him too?" But the widow stood her ground, her face pale yet resolute. She had faced ridicule before, after her husband's death, after struggling to keep her small farm alive. She had endured whispers of pity, even scorn, and she had learned to hold her head high through it all. But today was different. Today, she wasn't standing for herself. She was standing for him. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You know what you're saying, ma'am. This isn't charity. This man is dangerous. You take him, and his actions are your responsibility." Her voice did not waver. "I'll take him, whatever it costs." The sheriff smirked, thinking she would back down at the mention of money, then pay. A hush fell. Slowly, with steady hands, the widow reached into the pocket of her faded dress and pulled out a small leather pouch. Coins clinked softly as she laid them on the platform. It wasn't much, everything she had saved for seed grain and winter supplies, enough to risk her family's future, enough to shock the crowd into silence. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered insults under their breath. But the deal had been struck. The sheriff, though clearly displeased, scooped up the coins and untied the ropes binding the man's wrists. The crowd watched eagerly, almost hungrily, expecting violence. They believed the moment the bonds fell away, the so-called savage would lash out, proving them right. But he didn't. He simply stood there, rubbing his raw wrists, his sharp eyes darting toward the woman who had just purchased his freedom. She met his gaze without fear. "Come with me," she said softly. Dot. For a long, tense moment, he didn't move. Trust had been beaten out of him long ago, and the idea that anyone, especially a white woman, would see him as more than a beast of burden seemed impossible. Yet there was no mockery in her tone, no cruelty in her eyes. Only a strange, steady courage. Dot. The crowd jeered again as she turned, walking away from the platform. "Don't say we didn't warn you," one man shouted. "Better keep a rifle by your bed, widow, or you won't wake up in the morning," another taunted Dot. Her children, standing at the edge of the square, clung to each other, wide-eyed and frightened. They had seen men sold before but never rescued. They had seen cruelty but never defiance this bold. Their mother's choice both terrified and amazed them. Dot. The man finally stepped down from the platform. He followed at a distance, his stride heavy and uncertain. The ropes were gone, but he was not free, not really. Chains of suspicion, bitterness, and pain still bound him tighter than any rope ever could. Dot. The walk back to the widow's homestead was silent. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dusty road. Her children trailed close behind, stealing nervous glances at the tall, silent figure walking just a few paces away. Every step echoed with unspoken questions. Dot. When they reached the small farm, the woman paused at the gate. "This is my home," she said quietly. "You're safe here. I won't treat you as they did." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. Safe. The word felt foreign to him. He had learned that safety was an illusion, easily shattered by hate and greed. Still, something in her voice, in her unwavering gaze, made him pause. Dot. Inside the house, the children whispered to each other, uncertain whether to trust their mother's judgment. The older one finally asked, "Why did you bring him here, Mama? He's dangerous." The widow knelt down, brushing a lock of hair from her child's forehead. "People are dangerous when they are treated like animals. But I saw something else in him, something worth saving." Her words hung heavy in the air. Dot. That night she prepared a meal, simple bread and stew, and placed it on the table. For the first time in years, the man sat before food that wasn't thrown at him like scraps. He didn't touch it at first, suspicious. Then slowly he reached out, tasting cautiously. Dot. It was not the food that filled him. It was the strange, almost unbearable kindness. Dot. The children watched closely, still uneasy. The widow, however, simply said, "You'll work here if you choose, you'll eat here, and no one will call you a savage under my roof." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as though testing her words. For the briefest moment, the hard lines of his face softened. Dot. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew this was only the beginning of a journey neither of them could yet imagine. Dot. The next morning, the farmhouse was heavy with silence. Outside, the rooster crowed and the sun stretched over the fields, but inside, unease clung to every corner. Dot. The man, still unnamed in their eyes, rose early, his instincts sharpened by years of survival. He stood by the door, scanning the land. Beyond the fence, as though expecting an ambush. Old habits die hard, especially when one has been hunted for so long. Dot. The widow's children crept down the stairs, their small feet hesitant on the wooden steps. They whispered to each other, peeking around the corner to see if he was still there. He was, and that alone made them uneasy. Dot. The younger child tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, he scares me." The widow's heart tightened. She knelt, drawing the little one close. "He won't hurt us," she said gently, though her own courage was tested in that moment. "He's not here to cause harm. We must give him a chance." But children are slow to trust, and fear is quicker than love. Dot. At the breakfast table, the tension only deepened. The man sat quietly, eating the bread she had set before him, his movements careful, guarded. He did not speak, though his sharp eyes missed nothing. The crack in the window, the worn floorboards, the way the children kept their distance. Dot. Finally, the eldest boy blurted out, his tone edged with defiance. "Why is he here, Mama?" "We don't need him." The words cut the air like a blade. The man's jaw tightened, though he did not look up. He had been called worse, heard harsher things, but somehow the sting from a child's voice was sharper than the jeers of a mob. Dot. Widow answered softly, "Because everyone deserves a chance. Because I believe he's more than what they call him." The boy scowled, crossing his arms. "You're wrong. He'll leave, just like Papa did." The room fell silent. The memory of their father was a wound that had never healed. The man finally lifted his gaze, meeting the boy's eyes with a steadiness that surprised even the widow. He did not speak, but there was no anger there, only an understanding born of his own losses. Outside, common neighbors gathered at the fence, line their voices carrying across the fields. The gossip had spread quickly. "Have you heard the widow brought a savage into her home? She's endangering her children, foolish woman. Won't be long before he robs her blind, or worse." The words were like poison seeping through the air. The widow could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. Still, she held her head high, though inside her resolve trembled. That afternoon, she gave the man simple tasks: fetching water, chopping wood, mending the broken gate. He worked without complaint, his hands steady and skilled. The children watched from a distance, curiosity warring with fear. At one point, the younger child dropped a small bucket while carrying it from the well. The handle snapped, water spilling across the dirt. She froze, terrified, expecting harsh words or anger. But instead, the man knelt, taking the broken bucket gently from her hands. He repaired it with quiet efficiency, then returned it without a word. The little girl blinked, startled by the unexpected kindness. She said nothing, but a tiny seed of trust was planted in her heart. That evening, when the widow placed food on the table, the man hesitated. Slowly, he looked at her and said, in a low, rough voice, "Why?" It was the first word he had spoken. Since she brought him home, the widow paused, surprised. "Why, what?" His gaze was steady, searching. "Why help me?" Her children turned to her, waiting for the answer. She folded her hands, her voice calm but firm. "Because the world has given up on you, but I won't. I see a man, not a savage, and I will not let hate decide who you are." The words lingered in the silence. The man looked away, but something in his expression softened, just a flicker, quickly hidden. The children didn't know what to make of it. The neighbors still whispered, and even the widow herself sometimes questioned her own boldness. But that night, as the farmhouse settled into uneasy rest, one truth became clear. Trust would not come easily. Respect would take time. And the journey ahead would test them all. Because saving a man was never as simple as freeing him from ropes. It meant freeing him from chains much deeper. Chains of fear, mistrust, and a lifetime of pain. And though the widow had chosen this path, she knew the hardest part had only just begun. Days passed, and with them came small, almost unnoticeable shifts in the air around the farmhouse. What had once been a suffocating silence now carried faint ripples of movement, sounds of chopping wood, the steady rhythm of tools repairing what had long been broken, the quiet thud of heavy footsteps across the yard. The man worked. Without complaint, without hesitation, he rose early each morning and threw himself into the tasks before him. He patched the sagging barn door, strengthened the fence posts, and hauled water from the well with a strength that amazed even the eldest boy who had resented him most. The farm, which had been crumbling piece by piece since the widow's husband died, slowly began to look alive again. Though his hands labored, his mouth remained silent. He spoke rarely, only when necessity demanded. His eyes, however, missed nothing. He studied the land, the animals, and the children, who still watched him warily from a distance. One afternoon, as the sun blazed hot over the fields, the eldest boy tried to chop firewood. He swung the axe awkwardly, the blade sinking only part way into the log. Sweat beaded on his brow, frustration mounting. He struck again, harder, but the wood mocked his effort, refusing to split. The man approached quietly. The boy stiffened, his grip tightening on the axe. "I don't need your help," he snapped. The man didn't argue. He simply reached out, took the axe, and with one smooth, powerful motion, split the log clean in two. Then, without a word, he handed the axe back. The boy blinked, startled, not by the man's strength, but by the absence of mockery. There was no smugness, no laugh at his failure, just silent instruction. This is how it's done. From that day, the boy began to watch him differently. Still guarded, still stubborn, but curious. The younger child, too, had her moment. While chasing a chicken through the yard, she tripped, falling hard against the dirt. She winced, ready for scolding. Instead, the man bent down, lifted her gently, and brushed the dust from her dress. His rough hands, scarred and calloused, moved with surprising tenderness. "Careful," he said softly, the second word the children had ever heard from him. The little girl stared at him in wide-eyed wonder. Later that evening, when her mother tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mama, he's not as scary as I thought." The widow smiled faintly, though she knew the path ahead was still long. The change was not only within the family, it reached beyond. One morning, while working near the fence line, a group of townsfolk rode by. They slowed their horses, sneering. "See that? He's already doing her chores. Next, he'll own the place." Laughter rang out, cruel and sharp. The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The widow, however, stepped outside, her voice firm. "Say what you want," she called back, "but this farm stands because of him." The riders scoffed and rode on, but her words lingered. The children, who had been listening from the porch, looked at their mother with new respect. She wasn't just protecting the man. She was standing up to the world for him. That night at supper, something unexpected happened. The man, who had eaten in silence every evening, finally spoke more than a word. "You trust me?" he asked. His voice low, uncertain. The widow met his gaze across the table. "Yes, I do." He looked down, as though the weight of those words was too much to bear. Trust was a gift he hadn't known in years, if ever. The eldest boy frowned, but said nothing. The little girl smiled, shy but genuine. Later, as the fire crackled in the hearth, the man stepped outside, staring up at the night sky. The stars stretched endlessly above him, the same stars he had looked to in his hardest nights. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone beneath them. Inside, the widow watched him from the doorway. She saw not the stranger she had brought home, not the savage the town called him, but a man slowly rediscovering his humanity. And though the journey of trust was far from over, one truth was becoming clear. He was no longer just surviving. He was just beginning to live. The calm that had begun to settle over the widow's homestead did not last long. Change never comes without resistance, and in towns where fear runs deep, whispers can grow sharper than knives. By now, word had spread far beyond the market square. Every neighbor, every shopkeeper, every farmhand knew the story. The widow who had dared to bring a savage into her home. Some called her foolish, others reckless, but the cruelest called her sinful. And cruelty spreads quickly. One gray morning, as the widow walked into town for supplies, she could feel the eyes on her. Conversations hushed when she entered the store. A man muttered loudly enough for her to hear, "She's protecting an animal." Another spat, "Her poor children, living with a beast under their roof." She ignored them, as she always had, but their words cut deep. Back at the farm, the man sensed the tension even before she returned. He was no stranger to hostile eyes. He had grown up with them, survived under their weight. But now those eyes were turned not just on him but on her, and that he could not abide. That night, as they sat around the table, the eldest boy finally let his anger spill. "They're right," he said bitterly. "Everyone says you've lost your mind. You risked everything for him. For what? He'll never be like us." The widow set down her spoon slowly, her face calm, though her heart burned. "He doesn't have to be like us. He only has to be who he is." The boy's voice rose. "Papa would never have—" "Enough!" She cut him off, her voice firm but trembling. "Your father is gone, and I will not teach you to hate just because others do." Silence fell, heavy and sharp. The boy pushed his bowl away and stormed from the table. The little girl clutched her mother's arm, confused and frightened. The man sat quietly, his dark eyes lowered, but inside he felt a storm. He had caused this division. His presence was tearing at the fragile threads of this family, and for a moment he wondered if leaving was the only way to protect them. But fate had its own plans. 2 nights later, the storm came, not of whispers, but of thunder. The sky split open with lightning, rain pounding against the earth in sheets. The wind howled, tearing at the roof of the barn. Inside, the animals cried out in panic, kicking against their stalls. The widow rushed to the door, her heart racing. The barn it won't hold. Before she could move, the man was already out the door, racing through the storm. His bare feet splashed through the mud as he fought against the wind, forcing the barn doors closed against the fury of the storm. The eldest boy followed, struggling to help, but the wind nearly knocked him from his feet. The man caught his arm, steadying him with a grip like iron. Together they dragged planks across the doors, bracing them against the gale. Inside the house, the widow held her daughter close, praying as the thunder roared. Through the window she saw the 2 figures silhouetted by lightning, her son and the man she had defended, working side by side against the storm. When the worst had passed and the rain slowed to a steady drizzle, the boy collapsed in the mud, chest heaving. The man pulled him up, half carrying him back to the house. Soaked and shivering, the boy looked up at him, his eyes wide. You saved me," he whispered. The man said nothing, but the boy saw the truth written in his steady gaze. For the first time the wall between them cracked. Inside, the widow wrapped her son in a blanket, tears of relief shining in her eyes. She looked at the man, her voice breaking. "Thank you." He gave a single nod, then stepped back, uncomfortable, with praise. But in that moment something shifted. The children no longer saw just the stranger their mother had brought home. They saw the man who had stood against the storm to keep them safe. The townsfolk would not care about this night. They would continue to mock, to sneer, to warn her of the danger she harbored. But inside that farmhouse, the truth was beginning to take root. This was no savage. This was a man, loyal, brave, and worth saving. And though the storm had passed, a greater one was yet to come. Morning came quietly after the storm, the sky washed clean, the air damp with the smell of earth. The farmhouse stood intact, the barn held, and for the first time in months, the widow felt a fragile peace settle over her land. The man was outside at dawn, repairing the shingles that the storm had torn loose. His hands moved steadily with purpose. The eldest boy, though still sore and tired, joined him. He didn't say a word, just picked up a hammer and started handing nails. The man glanced at him once, then accepted the unspoken truce. By noon, the roof was patched, the fences checked, and the animals fed. When they came inside, muddy and worn, the widow had a meal waiting. For the first time, the table felt less like a battlefield and more like a home. The little girl giggled as she watched the man awkwardly try to use a spoon, too small for his calloused hands. He glanced up, confused by her laughter, until she offered him a bigger wooden ladle. For a moment, a flicker of a smile ghosted across his face. Small, fleeting, but real. That smile was not lost on the widow. She saw in it the first visible crack in the stone walls he had built around his soul. The days that followed unfolded differently. The man began to teach the children in his own way. When the eldest boy struggled to lift a hay bale, the man showed him how to use his legs instead of his back. When the little girl tripped again while chasing chickens, he steadied her, teaching her patience instead of scolding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the widow found him near the barn, showing her son how to shape a bowstring. "Why are you teaching him that?" she asked softly. The man looked at her, his voice quiet but firm. "Because a boy should know how to protect what he loves." The widow felt her breath catch at his words. It wasn't just instruction, it was a lesson about life, about family, about standing tall in the face of storms both outside and within. But transformation isn't just skill, it's trust. One morning, the widow fell ill. Her strength, usually unshakable, wavered. She lay weak in her bed, the children frightened. For the first time, the household leaned entirely on the man. He took charge quietly, cooking a simple stew, feeding the children, keeping the fire burning. The little girl sat on his knee as he stirred the pot, her small hands tangled in the rough fabric of his shirt. He didn't push her away. Instead, he let her stay, a silent protector, until she fell asleep against him. When the widow woke later. That evening she saw her children safe and warm by the hearth, the man keeping watch. In her weakened state, her heart swelled with gratitude. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "You've given us back more than I ever dreamed." The man only nodded, but deep inside, her words settled like roots. He was no longer just surviving here, he was belonging. Of course, the town's whispers hadn't gone away. The widow knew that. Every trip for supplies was still laced with cruel stares, muttered judgments. But slowly she stopped caring. Her strength now came not from the approval of neighbors, but from the bond growing in her own home. One evening, as they sat outside watching the fireflies dance above the grass, the eldest boy broke the silence. "Was wrong," he said, his voice low. "You're not what they say you are." The man looked at him, surprised. "You're better," the boy continued. "You saved us. You saved Mama." The widow placed her hand gently on her son's shoulder, pride in her eyes. The man didn't speak, but the warmth in his gaze was answer enough. The little girl, too, climbed onto his lap, looking up at him with pure innocence. "You're part of us now," she declared firmly. The widow's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's words. The man, caught off guard, swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He wasn't a burden. He wasn't a savage. He was family. And though the road ahead would not be free of danger, one truth had rooted itself firmly in the farmhouse. The man they once feared had become the very heart of their survival. The peace that had grown inside the widow's home was fragile, like a seedling pushing through hard soil. It had taken root, but one harsh wind could still tear it away. That wind came sooner than expected. One afternoon, as the man and the eldest boy worked in the fields, a group of riders appeared at the edge of the property. Dust rose beneath their horses' hooves, their faces hard, their eyes filled with judgment. They weren't just neighbors, they were men from town, emboldened by whispers and fueled by fear. The widow stepped outside, shielding her daughter behind her. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. "What do you want?" The leader spat on the ground. "We warned you, that man doesn't belong here. You think he's saving you? He'll turn on you. They always do." The man stood still, silent, his jaw clenched. His past had taught him that words rarely changed hearts. But when the eldest boy stepped in front of him, fists balled, it was the boy's defiance that spoke louder than any words. "He's not what you say he is," the boy shouted. "He saved us. He saved this farm. He saved my mama." The crowd laughed, cruel and sharp. "You're blind, boy. He'll never be one of you." The widow's voice cut through the air. "Then he doesn't need to be. He is himself, and that is enough." The leader sneered, but something in her conviction silenced him for a moment. Still, anger simmered. "You'll regret this," he warned, before jerking his reins and leading the riders away. The danger wasn't gone. It was only delayed. The widow knew they would be back, and next time perhaps with worse intentions. But when she looked at her children standing beside the man, unafraid, she realized something. They weren't facing this storm alone anymore. That night. The farmhouse was quiet, but inside, hearts were restless. The widow sat at the table, staring at the fire. The man entered quietly, pausing as though unsure if he belonged in the moment. "You could leave," she said softly, not looking up. "If you did, they might leave us alone." The silence stretched long before he finally spoke. "And if I leave, who will protect you?" Her eyes filled with tears. He didn't see himself as a burden anymore. He saw himself as a protector. "You've already protected us," she whispered, "more than I ever thought anyone could, for—" The first time he met her gaze fully, without flinching, without walls. "Then let me stay." Her breath caught, but she nodded. The decision was made, not out of desperation, but out of trust. The days that followed were not easy, but they were filled with resilience. The man taught the boy how to track, how to build, how to defend without cruelty. The girl learned patience and courage at his side. The widow, though weary of the town's judgment, found strength in the bond her family had built. And slowly, quietly, the land around them thrived. The fields grew stronger under their combined hands, the animals healthier, the farmhouse sturdier. Where once there had been only loss and loneliness, there was now purpose. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, the widow stood with her children on the porch. The man worked in the field, his silhouette tall and steady against the sky. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama," she said softly, "they call him Savage, but I think he's our blessing." The widow's throat tightened. She kissed her daughter's head, whispering, "Yes, my love, that's exactly what he is." But fate wasn't finished testing them. Weeks later, the riders returned, this time with fire in their eyes. They dismounted, approaching the farmhouse, with ropes and rifles. The widow stepped outside again, her children clinging to her. The man stood beside her, no longer as an outsider but as a shield. The leader barked, "Last chance, give him up, or we'll take him." The man tensed, ready to fight. But before he could move, the widow stepped forward. Her voice rang out clear, strong enough to cut through the night. "You call him savage, you call him dangerous, but I call him what he is, a man worth saving. And if you take him, you'll have to take us too." Her son stepped beside, her chin raised in defiance. The little girl, small but fierce, echoed, "He's family." For a moment the mob faltered. They had expected fear, not unity. They had expected weakness, not strength. The man's presence had not destroyed this family. It had made them unbreakable. The leader cursed under his breath, spat again, and waved his men off. "This ain't over," he growled. But even as they rode away, their power was broken, for the widow had drawn her line, and her children had chosen their side. That night, when the danger had passed, the family sat together by the fire. No words were needed. The bond between them was unshakable now. The man, once silent and broken, reached out and placed his hand gently over the widow's. She didn't pull away. Instead, she held it tightly, as though it had always been meant to be there. And in that moment, under the flicker of firelight, the truth became clear. He was no longer the outcast they had saved. He was the one who had saved them all.